Last time we talked, we were talking about stress, and now we're talking about the law. How did you get involved in neuroscience and the law?
Well, it's one of those where you realize if you spend enough time sort of thinking about one neuron at a time, and then 10 neurons, and then 100 million at a time, somewhere out the other end starts getting like real human behaviors and real human foibles. And sort of if you're trained in thinking about little bits of brain, it's kind of hard to look at intact human behaviors and frankly begin to deal with ideas like free will as falling into the picture there. And you start going in that direction, and you got to start thinking about law in the brain.
What about free will? How much free will do you think we have?
Well, sort of the way I think of it these days is if there is free will, it's in all the boring places.
Like what?
Oh, maybe sort of how many buttons I closed on this shirt before I got wired up there.
In other words, there's free will about how you button your shirt.
Well, secretly, I don't even believe there's much in that domain.
So if free will is not happening, what is happening? What is it? We're all working in the background here, and we don't. Whatever comes up to consciousness is just like a TV show.
Oh, coming from you, I'm not sure quite what that's implying.
No, I mean it's just sort of entertaining to find out what decisions are being made that we have no control over.
Well, an awful lot of work suggests that a lot of what we're doing when we're ostensibly making moral decisions, moral judgments, is post hoc justification for things that subliminally our brain knew long before we consciously knew we were going in that direction. I mean, in a sense, where the free will thing comes in, and most of us can deal with determinism to a certain extent. Like you come out and you've just gotten a great new suit, and somebody sees you and says, "Great suit." And you know, most of us are trained to say thanks, and a quarter second afterward to feel slightly sheepish because I didn't make that suit. I didn't grow the Egyptian cotton. Am I being congratulated on picking the right tailor? Am I being congratulated on earning enough money to pay? It wasn't really me. We have a whole lot more trouble if someone says, "Oh my God, you're beautiful, look at your cheekbones." And we're not really trained to say, well, actually my zygomatic arches, the angle of it is such that, no, we're willing to somehow take credit for what our facial structure bones were seeing.
But we had nothing to do with that.
We had nothing to do with
less than choosing a suit. We didn't choose our
Even
genes.
less. And you know, you begin to get into this realm, and once you start seeing things like frontal cortex, which I assume you've been talking about endlessly in the context of this program, the stuff your mother consumed or didn't consume or abused or recreated with or whatever when you were a fetus has something to do with how your frontal cortex works. By the time you're 6, your socioeconomic status is a predictor of how active your frontal cortex is when you're given a task that requires you to do some gratification postponement. By the time you're that age, the thickness of this part of the brain is already influenced by the mothering style and the number of stressors you had in childhood. Anyone who could sit there and look at somebody where they have had a failure of regulating their behavior at some critical juncture in their life and saying, this is a domain that neuroscience has nothing to do with. This is a domain where we've got a free pass to talk about things like free will and the soul and, God help me, things like good and evil. It's as ridiculous as making a claim to you're responsible for the shape of your cheekbones.
Okay, well, that raises a really good question. We have a crime on this program where a boy who's just 18 goes into a shop with friends of his, and he's carrying a gun. There's a lot of yelling. The clerk's wife comes through the door. The kid turns in almost reflexively, or maybe reflexively, fires the gun. Now she's in a coma. And so he has no responsibility for that?
You know, after a while, the word responsibility is irrelevant. And that's not to do, oh my God, bleeding heart before you know it. They're going to be
It really sounds like that.
no, not
I mean,
just empty out the jails and sing Kumbaya with everyone who
yes.
comes
So
out the other side of it.
okay, now answer that, because that was my next question.
Okay. It doesn't change in the slightest the need to protect people from people whose behavior can't be regulated, often the need to protect the people themselves. It doesn't change in the slightest the capacity to think about deterrence as a function of how you treat that person. But what it has to completely remove from the table is the notion that there's concepts like evil, or by the time you get at there are types of brain damage where somebody can sit there afterward and tell you precisely what is the appropriate behavior to do, whether or not it's the appropriate behavior of solving this little puzzle or the appropriate behavior of what you should and shouldn't do to your fellow human, and yet they can't regulate their behavior. And you take that into account, and it's absurd to frame the criminal justice system in the sort of world of volition and blame and soiled soils and souls that we have at this point. It's absurd.
So when you have a body of law that assigns guilt and punishment, do you go all the way back in your thinking to the law, not just how cases are settled in court, but how the laws ought to be rewritten to take into account the fact that it's not right or fair to put people in jail for things that they didn't decide to do? Or am I misunderstanding?
Well, no, actually, I think it needs to be torn apart from top to bottom, which is not meaning that we do not have to restrain people. I mean, a car whose brakes are broken is a very dangerous machine, and we have a societal responsibility to make sure it doesn't go rolling through the playground of a preschool. But the car was not sinful if its brakes failed.
But they don't send people to jail because they're sinful, at least not usually in this country. They send them because they committed an act that is told to them by law is not permitted. And if you do it, you get this punishment if we decide you really did it. Sometimes how they decide they did it is a little shaky. But they're not called evil, are they?
I think an awful lot of people in this country have no trouble invoking terms like that.
Yeah.
I think most of the polls suggest a majority, if not more than that, of people in this country invoke concepts like that in explaining human behavior.
And even if they do, if they consider them evil, if the judge says you committed an evil act and it's reprehensible and there's no forgiveness, or whatever he says, goes on and on. It doesn't matter what he says. The thing that the judge does is what counts, which is to put the guy in jail for 30 or 40 years of the rest of his life. And are you saying that that's useless? What should we do if we don't put them away?
At the end of the day, we may wind up putting as many people away for as long of a period of time. And all of this is, not quite navel contemplation, because it really is a very meaningful thing if we wind up simply saying, for reasons that started outside your control with when you were a 3-week-old first trimester fetus, things were already going against you in the frontal cortex that would have to deal with the world's temptation somewhere down the line. Even if we're framing it that way, and at the end of the day we still decide this is somebody who is too dangerous to be out on the streets, we are doing the same duty to protect people, but it's a very different way of thinking about what goes wrong in someone and how to frame what's done to them.
If you don't mind, that we're a little too close to good and evil. These are the gates of hell. Let me just come over here for a minute.
Those ironies.
That's what's making me ask all those questions. I have a real question about what you said, because it seems to me it cuts both ways. If you know statistically that people who were abused or had suffered a childhood of the kind you described tend to wind up doing things that we don't approve of, although some of them may have the chance to reclaim themselves with maybe a little help, if we decide that based on how we feel about them in general, we put them away for a long time, then we might be putting away people who could be saved and become useful, helpful members of society.
Oh, absolutely. And not to make too much of a comparison, but in the early 1950s, the majority of hospital beds in this country were occupied with people with severe psychiatric disorders. Most of these hospitals where people were just warehoused in the back wards of the back of beyond kind of thing, and classes of medications, antipsychotics were invented and emptied out those hospitals. Obviously not a perfect parallel, but the understanding of what goes wrong with behavior has to carry with it the promise that something can be fixed. And, as one spin-off of this whole debate, one of the things that can't be fixed is imposition of a death penalty.
Yes, once you do that, that's it.
Yeah. The big puzzle with this, though, or the big challenge is, okay, take even the crude example here that lots of people can kind of deal with massive damage to the frontal cortex. Mm-hmm. My God, this is someone who may know, understand, even be able to state the rules of appropriate behavior, but nonetheless can't regulate it. Oh my God, neurological damage, they're out of control. Nonetheless, there is not a whole lot of science at this point that would say this is the person who, thanks to the frontal damage, is going to be a remorseless, affectless, reptilian serial murderer, whereas that one is going to belch loudly during wedding ceremonies and not realize, you really have to keep yourself from doing that. What's the science that lets you...
I think the penalty for both of them is probably...
I got to go with you on that one, but still. There isn't a science at this point that would say for this amount of damage, who's going to be holding up the convenience stores and who's going to be just berserkly imprudent in what they do with their rooks when they're playing chess. There's the first few hints. For the same degree of damage, you're probably more likely to be the one belching at the wedding ceremony than in the maximum security penitentiary, if you had a stable, loving, middle-class upbringing, if you had no childhood traumas thrown in on top of your brain damage, if you had adequate prenatal nutrition and weren't marinated in a lot of alcohol when you were a fetus, we're beginning to get a sense of the additional pieces, and none of them so far are too surprising, but there isn't a great science yet to say which one will be the serial murderer and which one will just have really improved.
No, right. So, you don't put statistics on trial, you put individuals on trial, and you have to decide what you're going to do about this particular guy who did this particular act. But if you put that individual on trial and you offer up the Officer Krupke defense, which is based on statistics, people with this kind of childhood tend to do this kind of thing, so don't blame me. Aren't you sort of up the creek?
You are, which is why there's got to be a bridge between sort of this great philosophical subject that keeps, people like me fed Danish during breaks at scientific meetings, and how it turns out what you do with actual people who've done actual appalling things. Mm-hmm. And at this stage, maybe all you can do is, again, if at the end of the day the person is kept away from society for the same length of time as if you had some bewigged judge talking about the soul, even if it's the same outcome at the end, if your mindset is, we may understand how to fix this, the day after tomorrow through some breakthrough, and it's going to show us we've been dealing with a damaged machine. And if we have a framework where we're not sitting there having a realm of judgmentalism that is absurd, this counts as a lot of progress.
Do you picture science supplying something to replace judgmentalism, to replace punishment for the sake of punishment, or even removal from society without some kind of amelioration, some kind of rehabilitative effort?
Oh.
You think is that what you look forward to?
Oh, I think rehabilitation is critical to aim for, and it will be a terrific thing if science actually makes us better at it. But the whole way in which it is framed has to change, absolutely.
Is rehabilitation possible now for the majority of people in prison, would you say?
I think at that juncture, I have to cite my expertise with rats and say I don't want to go near that one. There's got to be more. Just a huge theme in neuroscience is the brain is vastly more malleable than anybody ever thought, has more of a capacity to respond to environment, to experience. 90-year-old brains are making new neurons in response to stimulation. The notion of a brain set in stone, especially a damaged brain set in stone, is just not tenable anymore. Nonetheless, at the same time, we don't know a whole lot about how to make those things better. And I think in a Krupke-esque way, more and more we see it should have been interventions preventatively beforehand.
Do you see the neuroscience that's at the stage it's at now being useful in the courtroom, the way the laws are set up now and the way justice is done now?
Yes.
Or is it going to help if it's brought in soon, or will it be hurtful?
Painfully, I think most of what it can be doing at this point is just changing the conversation. It's not there yet. I don't think it's there yet until you deal with someone with massive damage to their frontal cortex. For example, someone where every aspect of their behavior just screams that this is someone who's not in control of what they're doing. Then, organic impairment, volitional control type issues, I think neuroscience is ready for that. But more subtle stuff, it sure can't teach us. You get someone who their frontal cortex was blown away in an accident. Okay, this is a special case. We sure don't have the neuroscience yet to deal with the fact that you might have 2.3% more synapses in your frontal cortex than I do, or the other way around, and does that tell us anything? Not remotely in that ballpark yet. And if we can't use that neuroscience to tell us something about abnormal antisocial behavior in that realm, we sure can't use it to begin to explain why one of us might be more disciplined at studying for an exam than the other. It's not remotely translated.
So what do you see as the contribution of neuroscience at some point to the justice system? Does it start in the courtroom, or should it start all the way at the beginning, reframing our laws?
Well, we professor types state things in these very cautious, qualified ways, so I'll do that here and just say the whole system has to go. The modern criminal justice system is incompatible with neuroscience. It simply is not possible to have the two of them in the same room.
Okay, all right. Okay, now we have the boy in the room. We got a psychiatrist there. We have a defense attorney, a judge, a prosecutor. What should happen to that boy? And should the boy can he bring to bear any knowledge about his brain that neuroscience can give us to achieve a better kind of justice in that courtroom today, now, in this trial?
Well, from my understanding of how this stuff works, the yes, no, guilty, innocent, black, white, all none aspects of the law has one domain where you get a lot of wiggle room in there, and that's the sentencing phase. And that sure is where I hope scientifically educated, empathic, intellectually adventurous judges can begin to deal with the notion that they're working in an outmoded model and try to take advantage of the wiggle room there.
So the kid is just 18. He turned 18 the day that he committed the crime. So there's impulsivity to be considered. His brain isn't fully developed. He's had cocaine that day. He's with his friends, the influence of peers on him. These are all things that have been studied by neuroscience.
Yep.
And they should all be brought to bear to give him a sentence that does what?
That takes into account that with any luck, things could be engineered so that kid won't be in that circumstance later on in life, that this is a atypical event, this is an anomaly in his life. With any luck, recognizing that within the range of sentencing that a judge has available, that doing things on the lesser side is probably the way to go with someone like that. But again,
does the judge have in his toolbox the ability to to condemn him to therapy? I mean, is he going to get a 9x5 jail cell, or is he going to get maybe that plus rehabilitation? Does that exist now?
Okay.
I've read that there's less and less concern with rehabilitation. Is that true?
That's my sense, but this one is way outside my my
Okay.
domain.
Well, me too. So that's why I'm asking you.
Right. That's why I'm turfing it back. You're the one who's been talking to the lawyers, not me.
So neuroscience and the current justice system can't even get in the same room together. This is what I hear you saying. How can we make them compatible?
Obviously, more research is needed, more public dissemination of how this stuff works, blah, blah, the usual. Obviously, or not so obviously, perhaps a bit more humility on the part of the legal end of this debate in recognizing that science keeps overturning our notions of what makes us human and what is within our realm of control. I mean, we're only, I don't know, a half dozen centuries or so past the point of viewing epileptics as being possessed by the devil and treating them accordingly. And we know that instead, no, it's actually not the devil. It's often a mutation in a rectifying potassium channel in the nervous system. Oh, that's a different explanatory model. It's not them, it's their screwed up ion channels in one part of the brain. It's not the devil after all. There's very little reason to think that science has gotten us as far as we're getting in saying, oh, it's not them, it's their whatever. I'm very impressed. Apparently there's a tradition in archaeology that when you uncover some mammoth, wonderful new site that you're going to spend the next 20 years excavating, the palace of whoever, that good archaeologists don't excavate the whole thing. They leave a big chunk of it unexcavated out of the certainty that 1 or 2 generations down the line, the archaeologists are going to be better at doing it and causing less damage. And that next generation, when they do it, they're not going to do the whole thing. They'll leave a piece. There's this sort of institutionalized humility of don't do anything irreversible. And some of the biggest ways, obviously, in which the criminal justice system ignores neuroscience is doing things that are not reversible.
How do you deal in your own head with the problem that there are a lot of people making laws in state legislatures that are they're making these laws out of anger and retribution, hurt, pain, all kinds of emotions that are understandable but don't fit in with the plan you have for the justice system?
Well, what this plan has to also incorporate is an obvious fact that we humans are not rational machines. If someone did something unspeakable to a loved one of mine, I would take every damn article I wrote on this subject and set fire to the person with them and make their bonfire, and it would, these are issues that are just rife with viscera. And part of what has to be calculated in is there's a neurobiology of a need for retribution. There's a neurobiology of vengefulness. We're humans.
But it sounds like you have to not only put the criminals in scanners, you have to put the legislators in scanners. I mean, there's this whole problem that you're not just dealing with people who do things that society doesn't accept. You're dealing with people who punish those who do those things that society doesn't accept. And they're not going to be so quick to change their minds about how they handle that, because the satirical way you describe how it sounds is how it sounds to them. A bleeding heart saying, open the gates, let them out, the poor kids, they didn't know what they were doing. That's almost what you're saying.
Well, no.
No, you're not saying let them out, are you?
There would be something wrong if a pseudo-auto mechanic bleeding heart stance said, let all those cars with brakes that don't work just go rolling down the block there. I mean, I live in San Francisco, there's hills. I would want a criminal justice auto mechanic system that would keep cars with broken brakes off the block. I would want them locked up for as long as their brakes were broken and not allowed off on the street.
And it sounds like you would also try to fix the brakes while they were locked up.
And if there was a way to do that, was great. And I sure would not talk about being something intrinsically wrong, and wrong with a capital W, and even invoke all sorts of Judeo-Christian thunderbolts to throw at that car's brake system, even though it could roll down the block and kill my loved ones. But it sure as hell needs to be kept off the streets, though.
Yeah.
It's just a totally different attributional model. Wonderful parallel. I think it was pre-Inquisition Spain or somewhere around then. Someone is accused of being a witch. Woman is accused of being a witch, and the criminal justice system is brought to bear on it, which is the person is sat down and is told the story of Christ's crucifixion, and if she doesn't cry at the story of this, she is obviously in league with Satan and is promptly burnt. Okay, so that's the way the law works. And there was a remarkable bleeding heart liberal doctor at the time who wrote a small treatise on the fact that you got to remember one thing, which is sometimes in elderly women, their lacrimal glands, where their tears are made, they atrophy with age, they dry up, and there's some older women who simply can't produce tears. So you need to remember that that could be an organic impairment problem, that now and then when you got someone who you think is a witch and they're not crying at the story of our Lord's crucifixion, check to make sure that the lacrimal glands are working, because that's an extenuating organic impairment. But as long as you got that one off the table, they don't cry, off they go, send them to the bonfire. That's what the current picture is when you say, okay, somebody had 99% of their frontal cortex blown all over the playground back when they were a kid, and they have problems regulating their behavior. Okay, keep that one in mind. That's a special case. It's got to move beyond a special case of saying, okay, just make sure they got a frontal cortex and their lacrimal glands aren't too atrophied to cry, and once you got that stuff sorted out, you can go back to our standard system. It's not tenable.